Welcome to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. In this podcast, we break down high-profile celebrity estate planning cases for advisors and their clients. Most celebrity estate catastrophes are based on the same issues that everyday people face, just with the volume turned up. Our goal is to identify and extract the individual estate planning issues that lie at the heart of each story. We then discuss what advisors should expect and how to avoid common pitfalls. Hosted by wealthmanagement.com Senior Editor David Lenok.
This podcast is sponsored by Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Silicon Valley Community Foundation specializes in supporting advisors. We provide tailored solutions and personalized support to deliver on your clients' philanthropic visions and deepen impact. To learn more, visit svcf.org or email us at donate@svcf.org. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of wealthmanagement.com's Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous. For anyone new to the podcast, in each installment, myself and a guest take on a different celebrity estate and attempt to extract some key lessons that planners can apply to more traditional clients. The idea being that celebrity estate planning stories, although often ridiculous in their details, generally have at their cores very basic issues that could just as easily apply to non-famous or fabulously wealthy clients. To learn more about estate planning and how you can better serve your clients, visit wealthmanagement.com/trusts-estates. Our monthly journal features tax law updates, wealth planning, retirement planning, and much more, written by thought leaders in the industry. That's wealthmanagement.com/trusts-estates. Today, we're joined once again by Victoria Gray. Victoria is the founder and principal of Insight Art Collectibles Advisory. Before launching Insight, Victoria spent over 20 years at Bonhams, one of the world's oldest and most prestigious auction houses, rising to deputy chairman of North America, while starting her career at Sotheby's, a leading global auction house. During her tenure, she served as senior vice president, managing director of the Valuations, Trust and Estates Department, and head of office for Bonhams San Francisco. She also built and led Bonhams Trust and Estates presence in New York, forging deep relationships with elite trust and estates attorneys, fiduciaries, wealth managers, and family offices nationwide. Thanks so much for joining us again, Victoria.
Thanks for having me, David.
Now, the subject of today's episode is a tragic one. It's beloved actor Gene Hackman. In a legendary career spanning over 4 decades, he played such indelible roles as Detective Popeye Doyle in The French Connection, villainous Sheriff Little Bill Daggett in Unforgiving, and Coach Norman Dale in Hoosiers. He received countless accolades, including 2 Academy Awards, 2 British Academy Film Awards, and 4 Golden Globe Awards, which will come up again later. Sadly, Hackman, who suffered from Alzheimer's later in his life, passed under bizarre circumstances in February of this year at the age of 95. He and his wife and primary caretaker, pianist Betsy Arakawa, 65, were both found dead, likely for weeks, in the home they shared. According to forensics experts, the couple died about a week apart. An investigation determined that Arakawa died roughly February 11th from hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare disease that is spread by infected rat droppings or rat saliva. And Hackman was believed to have died February 18th from heart disease with complications from Alzheimer's, according to the Associated Press. Now, Hackman reportedly left an $80 million estate to Arakawa, who was named in his will as a successor trustee. And Arakawa's will, in turn, designates her assets to a trust to be distributed to charitable organizations and the settlement of medical debts. Hackman and Arakawa, married since 1991, had no children together, but Hackman himself is survived by 3 adult children from his previous marriage to Faye Maltese, though they have a strained relationship. As revealed by the Daily Mail, the actor's will, last updated in June 2005, did not mention them at all. Hackman's tragic end is most aging people's worst nightmare, really. Effectively, his wife and caretaker passed, and unable to take care of himself, and lacking the capacity even to ask for help, Hackman sadly followed about a week later. This tragic case nonetheless does bring up a number of intriguing estate planning questions. So, Victoria, let's start with the most basic one here. What happens when, like in this case, the primary beneficiary of an estate plan predeceases the testator?
It's so interesting, this case, for a number of reasons, especially as it evolved from the time of death. So you may remember, David, at the time, a lot of assumptions were made when the bodies were discovered that it was a simultaneous death, right? I think there were rumors about perhaps carbon monoxide poisoning. And so there was this assumption that they died simultaneously. And it was only after, cell phone records, and I think they were able to get some information from Gene Hackman's pacemaker to sort of really piece together the timeline and figure out that, Betsy did in fact predecease him by about 5 or 6 days. But what's so interesting is that even prior to their passing, Gene Hackman had failed to update his estate plan. There were huge gaps in his estate planning. His first successor trustee was his former attorney from New York, Michael Sutton. And, I think he had passed away about 6 years prior to Hackman. So it's really, when estate planning documents are almost 2 decades old at that point and haven't had any updates, it's definitely, there's going to be some complications there. But of course, the lack of trust update can lead to these sort of unexpected beneficiaries wanting to come forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously his Alzheimer's complicated that sort of matter. I'm sure that Betsy was his power of attorney, but when she's busy taking care of a 90-year-old man with Alzheimer's, his day-to-day life of keeping him functional, sometimes, let me update his estate planning documents. It's like it's so far at the bottom of the list of priorities, even if you do happen to have the power of attorney in place, that it can easily get overlooked with just so many other responsibilities.
And we also, need to think about the fact that his estate plan was 2 decades old. That also can sort of work in the favor in this instance, in terms of claims, because, there can't be any questions about, capacity. Oftentimes, if the will or the trust has been updated within, say, several months of the date of death, or even, with someone with advanced Alzheimer's, if it had been updated, somebody could definitely question the validity due to mental capacity. But I think the beneficial thing here, the good thing was that both Hackman and his wife had named the same personal representative in their estate plan. And that was an attorney in Santa Fe, New Mexico by the name of Julie Peters. So since then, the judge has appointed her and the trust company that she works for, Avalon Trust Company, appointed them to handle the administration of the estate.
So, whether by planning or just by sheer fortuitous luck, they do have this common point of contact. Where does the case stand currently? Where does the estate currently now?
Yeah, it's interesting. So obviously, litigation is not uncommon in high value and high profile estates, as you well know. And of course, a lack of trust update can lead to often unexpected beneficiaries. But as of right now, all of the questions in terms of will his estate go to his estranged children, even though they were excluded from his will, there doesn't seem to be much happening on that front. Of course, it has been noted in the papers that Hackman's son has hired a very high-profile attorney from Proskauer Rose in Los Angeles to represent him. And I think that when he made that move, people assumed that there would be some challenges. But overall, although the 3 adult children are his only living heirs, they are noticeably absent from his will, even though he acknowledges them. And, I think that whatever charitable beneficiaries that he and his wife chose, through the Gene Hackman Living Trust, it seems like that appears to be moving forward. I know that, it was just announced that Bonham's Auction House in New York is going to be handling the auction of over 400 items from his estate. So it appears that the trust company is moving forward with the administration, selling assets. Of course, some of the banks and credit card companies have come forward and noted some debt, I think some 6-figure debt. So no doubt the trust company and the personal representative are eager to settle those.
Yeah, and this is an interesting case. I guess it's the presence of the trust that is what is keeping. Traditionally, I think in a case where sort of all the beneficiaries of a will were to predecease the testator, then you'd sort of be intestate even though you had a will.
Hmm.
And then obviously then, the kids would be the ones likely who would get, everything just as next of kin in most states. But here, I guess it's the trust and the presence of the trust company that sort of is giving them the argument of why it wouldn't be intestate and sort of the way to redirect it perhaps to these charities.
Yeah, well, I think, the judge appointed, I think, a temporary appointment, and then the trust company
Mhm.
moved forward to file for probate.
Got it.
But there doesn't seem to have been any litigation as of yet. But it's, obviously those sort of gruesome scenes, that we saw in the house, the police body cam footage has been, all over the news and things. And just that really, sort of unkempt house, and the situation and the conditions with which they were living were less than ideal. And it doesn't really give the three adult children, Gene Hackman's three adult children, much of an argument, because they had both been dead in the home for about 10 days before a caretaker on the property found them. The question is, like, did his three children, obviously weren't in regular contact with him, or perhaps they would have known, that they were being unresponsive.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's also, it's kind of, they really are selling everything out of that house, right? And it's odd you bring up the sort of the state of the house. 'Cause I remember last time we were on and we were talking about what, sort of part of the role of the seller is to sort of stage the house almost, right? And to present it in
Yes.
the most positive way for the sale. And here, the lasting image that people have of this home is sort of this awful hoarder's palace of like tragedy.
You bring up a great point, David, because you and I spoke about the importance of the in situ photography to sort of photograph the art and the things in situ to create the narrative and the storytelling. And you'll see with these three auctions of the Gene Hackman estate that are coming up, there are no in situ photographs at all. And actually one of the more important works of art is a painting by an American modernist painter, Milton Avery. I think has an estimate of 500 to 700,000. And if you look at the police body cam footage of when they entered the house, trying to find the bodies to see what was going on in there, you can see this painting hanging on the wall in that home.
It's wild. It really, you want to create the narrative, unless of course the narrative already exists, and it's terrible. Like, it really does kind of, well, obviously, we're always sort of these sort of estate auctions. We're always sort of at the bluntest terms, we're sort of talking about selling dead people's stuff, and for good reason. But this does sort of cast it in its most ghoulish possible light in a way, where it's like, oh, you may recognize such paintings from the police body cam footage of when we found their corpses. And it's like, this is awful.
I know. I think you have to sort of dial the time back a little bit and, think about Hackman, in his heyday, at his prime. And he was actually always interested in architecture and design. Architectural Digest magazine featured their Santa Fe home in the magazine in 1990, and he had a number of homes which he had renovated and done. And, he was actually an artist, a painter himself. And a number of his own personal paintings are coming up for auction, which are fascinating, I think, in addition to the film memorabilia and all of the sort of Hollywood, the scripts, those sorts of things.
Before the call, before we started recording, we were sort of talking about this auction, and one of the high, I guess, profile items is that a couple of his Golden Globes are being included. And I sort of asked you, like, why not Oscars? And you sort of had a very interesting answer. I didn't actually know this, but go ahead, tell them what you told me, I guess.
Yeah, so the Academy of Motion Pictures actually has an agreement that when you join the Academy, you sign an agreement that you don't ever actually own your Oscar, and that at the time of death, the Academy can purchase it back, has first right of refusal to purchase it back for the amount of $1. So, you're welcome to keep it during your lifetime. And I think actually, if there's a surviving spouse or, beneficiaries, they're allowed to keep it for their own personal use, but it can't ever be sold. So the Academy has first right of refusal to buy it back. And of course, they have never refused. And then the interesting thing is I've worked on so many estate tax appraisals for, Hollywood stars who have won Oscars. And, how do you then value it for the estate tax appraisal? Because if it can only ever be sold for $1, then it should be worth $1, right? But the IRS can be quite squirrely in terms of saying that, there's still a market, whether it's a black market or an illicit market, and it's worth more than that. So it's kind of this gray area, although, in the past couple of years, we have been filing the 706 with the value of $1 for any Oscars, and there haven't been any audits yet. Knock on wood.
Well, I'm gonna have to imagine that the Academy's lawyers are pretty man-eating. So the IRS may just be picking its spots there. It's like I don't want to pick a fight with the Academy's lawyers and have it be played out in the public eye.
Exactly.
Probably not the best look.
It's interesting. I think with this particular estate, obviously the very mysterious sort of situation in which they died and trying to piece together the chronology. And then, of course, the 3 estranged children from the first marriage and the second wife. I mean, it just creates this perfect storm scenario for estate litigation. But what I found interesting was that Avalon Trust Company, while administering the estate, they, have been doing a lot to try and protect themselves from liability. So they actually hired an art advisor out of New York to advise them in terms of, negotiating with the auction houses, deciding where should these items be sold, which auction house, which location, negotiating the best terms, making it as favorable as possible. I think so that if the beneficiaries ever came back and tried to accuse them of not maximizing the full potential value of the assets, they could then sort of lean on this very seasoned art advisor in terms of getting the best deal possible and really knowing the market. And the auctions are actually split between the East Coast and the West Coast, between New York and Los Angeles, which I think was a really strategic and smart move on the part of the auction house. They are selling all of the Hollywood memorabilia and sort of the Hackman personal items out of Los Angeles. And then the really important fine art, like the Milton Avery, the Diebenkorn at 300 to 500,000, all of the important, I think it's about 13 or 14 works of fine art will be sold in New York. And, the important thing with that artwork is that it's important in its own right, even without the Hackman Association. So people are going to buy those sort of 13 or 14 unique works because of what they are and not necessarily who owns them. But if you look at things like his pinball machines, his tennis rackets, all of those sorts of things, people want those because they were Gene Hackman's.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really is an interesting point that you brought up earlier, and that sort of being reinforced now, this idea that, this really is kind of the perfect storm for litigation, and it's sort of lucky, I guess, which is almost insane to say, but it's almost like fortuitous that everyone's dead and that there's estranged family, because otherwise you would normally, it's a very famous person with, very valuable property. Like normally people would be all over this. You'd have fake children coming out of the woodwork and long lost cousins, but it's like, because there was just such an estrangement and the two main people involved both died, if not simultaneously, very close to simultaneously. There's sort of nobody trying to really pick here. No one's trying to make a move when normally it would be sort of very open to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think so many people have wondered too, about this failure to update his documents, his estate planning documents. But, people that ask that question, I think that, they're forgetting how hard it is to get clients to focus on their estate planning to begin with. Right? I mean, nobody really wants to face their own mortality. And then once you've put the estate plan in place, it's sort of like put it in a file and tuck the file away where the sun doesn't shine and, check that off the list. So getting people to do the planning to begin with is a big hurdle. But then getting them to revisit it and do updates is almost next to impossible. So this is not uncommon.
Mm-hmm. It's also you're dealing with, as the plan is more in place, the person is also growing older and older.
Yes.
So it's also, even if the mind were willing, often the body is not, or vice versa. In these cases where it's like the person is just less able to do it, even if they wanted to.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I think he probably never assumed that his wife would predecease them. I think there was about
he's 30 years older than her. Yeah.
Yeah, 30-year age gap there. So, that's, that was really surprising. And then, of course, for his successor trustee, his attorney out of New York, also to predecease him. I mean, it's just, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, one of the things, we've mentioned simultaneous death a couple of times, and obviously it wasn't exactly the case here. But I just want to clarify, in a lot of, different states have different laws for this. But in the vast majority of states, simultaneous is a sliding scale. There's a lot of scare quotes around simultaneous. It doesn't have to be at exactly the same time. I believe in New Mexico, it's 120 hours, which are 5 days. Mm-hmm. So it's that 5 days apart is far from simultaneous. But under the law, that would be considered simultaneous death in New Mexico.
I think, I think there's some places that even consider sort of 3 months or so.
Yeah, it's a weird, it's a bit of a misnomer. In the law, where you're picturing, it's a car crash, they both die instantly together, and it's like, yeah, but it could also be they're in a car crash and then one dies, like you said, several months later, and it's still considered to be simultaneous. There's a lot of wiggle room with simultaneous. That's why it was very important for them to get sort of to nail down exact times of death for the couple. Although in this case, I guess since Betsy predeceased him, it was determined it mattered less, because that's sort of how it would have been treated if they were determined to have died simultaneously. But it's sort of an interesting wrinkle of this case. It just doesn't come up that often.
Yes. And of course, she left her everything. She said if in the off chance that her spouse predeceased her and there was no surviving spouse when she passed away, that, everything in her estate goes to charity. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we yet know who the beneficiaries are.
Of the charity? I believe it was put into a trust for charity, unless I can go back and check my notes.
Yes, I think it was the Gene Hackman Living Trust. And, but I don't think we know, who the ultimate beneficiaries of that will be yet.
Interesting. I mean, we know that there is some credit card debt here, which is an unusual thing to think of. We're talking about celebrities and something as mundane as credit card debt, but something that pretty much everyone ends up having to deal with, especially as people get older and they don't have a chance to pay their bills, or, they die, these bills go by. So there is a certain amount of money, it looks like about $100,000-ish estimated worth of credit card debt here, and those guys are going to, I guess, get the first crack at this. I imagine that's part of the reason why these sales are happening, so that they can have some liquidity to sort of cover these various, first come, first serve creditors.
Exactly. And I think that the auction should do really well. And then, of course, the real estate, I think, has been valued around $4 million or so. So, now that the house is cleared out and everything has been sent off to auction, the house will probably be the next to go.
I would be surprised. It'd be interesting to see the sort of person who's in the market for the Gene Hackman murder house. But I guess it's not a murder house, but it's the same idea, right? It was sort of, people died right here. You want to buy this house. But it wasn't, but it's a gorgeous, it's such a crazy situation, because it is, as you mentioned, it's a gorgeous home that was an Architectural Digest. It's a beautiful piece of property, but because of what happened there, all of a sudden it's just a little yucky.
Of course. It does, also they had chosen Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was, away from the public eye of Hollywood. In the last 30 years of their lives, they lived a very private life. I think that they were part of that, Santa Fe community. And, they worked really hard to just sort of live a more simple, less glitzy lifestyle, in the past few decades. And so, the fact that their home and these images and now the auction and everything has been splashed all over the news, with such intense interest in it, especially surrounding the very strange circumstances of their death, it kind of gives you reason for pause.
Yeah, it really is sort of a pretty intense violation of that they have no control over, really.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're coming up on the end of our time here. This Gene Hackman situation. It's so bizarre and so full of like strange estate planning nooks and crannies. If you had to, I guess, name one thing as sort of the most interesting aspect here, just from a purely clinical sense, obviously all of these aspects are awful. But if we're sort of looking at it in sort of postmortem clinical sense, what do you think is the most interesting lesson we can take away, or most interesting aspect of this particular fact pattern?
Oh gosh, I think, when his attorney, who was the successor trustee, passed away in 2019, so, it was about 6 years prior to Hackman's passing. At that point, I wonder if his wife, Betsy Arkawa, I wonder if she was in the right state of mind to name another successor trustee, because obviously, it was Hackman's attorney, and then it was her. And I would say the lesson would be, if at that point, maybe she would list kind of another successor trustee, or come up with an alternative plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very interesting. You mentioned capacity at that point. I mean, because at that point, she would have been a relatively young woman. She was 58, 59 years old. This is not traditionally the sort of, what you would think of as someone who's not capable of doing something, or would have trouble performing sort of simple tasks. But I think increasingly we're seeing that these incapacity questions, are, whether it's because we're noticing them or for some other reason, are sort of creeping up earlier and earlier a little bit.
Yes, and coming up with these contingency plans. So if there is the inability of a spouse to act as a successor trustee, what is the backup plan there? I still think it's just so lucky that they both named Julia Peters, the attorney, as they named the same personal representative. I mean, that really, I think that helped the judge out in Santa Fe in terms of appointing her and the trust company.
I mean, it saved it from intestacy, basically, which, I mean, kind of nobody wants at the end of the day. Like, it's there, it serves a purpose, but it's generally a pretty big failure if that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and that really would have opened the door, David,
Yes.
for the 3 estranged children to make a much stronger claim.
Yeah, but I mean, and again, intestacy has different rules in different states, but generally, sort of to oversimplify it, if you think of the family as a family tree, first you look down. In this case, there would be immediate heirs, so they would be first in line. And then in the odd situations where there are no heirs, then you would actually look back up. And often people's parents were considered the next in line, which is sort of the exact opposite of how you think an estate would be distributed. But things can get a little wacky. And then the government itself gets in there too as a potential beneficiary when there's nobody. So the intestacy can get a little out of control. So it's best not to leave estates to those whims.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. But now everyone will have a chance to purchase a little Gene Hackman memorabilia.
And hopefully the estate will get something out of it. Wherever it actually ends up ending up, I guess these charities. Well, some good will come of this ultimately after the sale. So
I sure hope so, David.
and with that, we're all out of time. I'd like to thank Victoria Gray for coming on and unpacking an truly unpleasant topic with us. Thank you, Victoria.
Unpleasant, but definitely fascinating.
Certainly. I know that's kind of that's always been the MO of this podcast. Unpleasant, but fascinating. It's celebrity estates. So thank you so much for coming on, Victoria.
Absolutely. Take care.
And for all listeners, I'll see you, or I guess you'll hear me, on the next episode of Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous. This podcast is sponsored by Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Silicon Valley Community Foundation specializes in supporting advisors. We provide tailored solutions and personalized support to deliver on your clients' philanthropic visions and deepen impact. To learn more, visit svcf.org or email us at donate@svcf.org.
Thank you for listening to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. Click the subscribe button below to become notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of InformaWealthManagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.